right, welcome everyone. I think we are ready to go. I'd like to begin by introducing our AI influencer and keynote, Dr. Jacob Agris, MD, PhD. Dr. Agris is senior healthcare executive and physician specializing in computer engineering, analytics, and machine learning, developing healthcare applications impacting over 26 million patients annually, and has performed extensive work across Fortune 500 companies and startups. Created a digital radiology platform at Bayer, founded Nano Force Sense, developing AI systems for monitoring physiological functions. Research includes leading an FDA-approved clinical studies using machine learning to enhance drug trials, and STEM outreach, actively promoting educational initiatives in 3D printing and robotics. I would just ask everyone, please stay on mute. Dr. Agris, you have the floor. You can share your slides, and you can unmute, and then I will mute.
You're welcome, everybody. Thank you very much. I'm going to share my screen now. Okay. And I'm going to come right to here. Hold on a second. See, it's going to let me share. Hopefully.
It should be open. I leave it open, so you should be able to. There we go. Coming up. If you want to enter full screen mode.
I'm going to do that.
There we go. Wonderful. Thank you. Wonderful. Thank you.
Okay, that looks good. All right. Well, welcome again. Thank you very much. I have right now been the founder and chief medical officer of Accenture, but I've also been at Bayer Healthcare and helped to lead their digital and AI group, and then at several other companies, been their chief medical officer and also helped lead AI development. So I wanted to kind of run you through some of the things that are different about healthcare AI versus AI that you would use for almost anything else. And all of you, I'm sure, have heard about ChatGPT. And 10 years ago, like Google Maps, very successful. ChatGPT, highly used, hopefully will also be a commercial success. But this is very different than healthcare AI. Now, healthcare AI would be for detection of disease, such as like breast cancer. And all of these applications have to be approved by a regulatory body. In the US, that's the FDA. In the EU, it's going to be the EU regulatory system and so forth. Now, if you're developing healthcare AI, some of the things you have to think about are quality systems. You're required to have quality systems. And in the EU, those are ISO certifications, and they get a 5-digit number. You also have to have design controls, meaning you have to document everything you do. First, you have to put down what the requirements are, and then build to those requirements and document it. You have to run clinical trials to prove that the software actually works and doesn't cause problems. You have to get regulatory clearance, which means you have to submit it. And it can take them anywhere from 3 months to 12 months to clear it. And then you still have to get reimbursed because, again, you don't get paid by your customer directly. There's third-party reimbursement systems. How does that differ from ChatGPT or Google Maps? Well, they don't require testing. There's no required reporting of errors, and there's no government review. So you kind of just throw it out there. So let me just step right into this and just give you an idea. If you were to develop a regulated healthcare company, or regulated healthcare software, what you're looking at. And it's a lot different than it would be if you were just developing like gaming software. Cost, it's really hard to get too much less than $10 million or almost the floor with clinical trials and so forth that we're going to talk about. And it can exceed $50 million. Time, you can't just build it and throw it out there. It usually takes at least 3 years because you're going to spend a year developing it, which is typical, but it'll take you almost a year to test it and then a year to get approval. And reimbursement, that can take an additional year or two because it's a third-party reimbursement system. So whenever you're out raising money, you've got to make it clear to your investors, this is not a short-term 1-year return on investment. And there are investors that love this area because the return is often, tenfold or greater in healthcare because you have to jump through all these hoops. And it's harder for competition to keep up because they have to jump through all these hoops. They can't just build it in their garage and release it tomorrow. I also want to mention IP. It's really important to pay attention to this for 2 reasons. One, you want IP, so what you've put all this effort and time into is protected. And I'll show you some examples of things that we've done that have IP on them, meaning we have patents. But you also have to do what's called a freedom to operate. Make sure someone else doesn't have IP on what you're trying to do. I mean, we just witnessed Apple, of all companies, one of the largest in the world, trillion-dollar companies, have a problem because they had a patent infringement on their wearable watch for detecting things. So it's really important to look at both sides. What can I protect of my own, but do I have the freedom to operate? Now, the other thing to know about a regulated healthcare company is that they talk about 3 stages: preclinical, clinical, and launch. Preclinical means you're developing the software. You haven't tried it out on any patients. Clinical means you're running a study and you're trying it out on patients. Launch means you've gotten FDA approval and you're ready to launch. And that still means you're dealing with reimbursement. So I just want to stop here for a second and just talk about data. Data is really critical. And sometimes data has secondary uses as well. But it's about 80% of the effort in AI. You need now, when you develop healthcare AI applications, to deal with HIPAA and in Europe, GDPR, to make sure your data privacy, you're not violating any patient privacy. You need to have centralized data access, and whether it's radiology or some other area, so that you can quickly use this data. Then the next point below on the bottom left here, I don't know if you can see my pointer, data structures and annotation. I want to touch on this for a second. This is really, really important. When you build AI, it needs to know what's the right answer, meaning you have to have labeled data. If you're building AI for self-driving cars, you need to know where stop signs are, other cars are. And for a lot of this, someone has to go in and check it or do it. There may be some semi-automated methods, but a lot of it's manually done. And so you can spend 80% of your effort just getting those data structures and annotated data there before you build your AI. AI may only be 20% of your effort. Okay, I'm going to give you a quick example here because I think it's always fun to see things done. One area that I've worked on heavily is in the cardiac or cardiopulmonary area, meaning heart, lungs, chest area. And this is about annotating data. If you want to find the right and left ventricles, and this is a CT scan of the chest and heart, this is the chest, these are the ribs, lungs, and heart in the middle here. And what's in pink and green are the ventricles, and we wanted to find them. So someone had to kind of color those in to make a standard of truth or be able to teach the AI. It's almost like if you had a toddler teaching them what's a cat or a dog. You have to have pictures and say dog, dog, dog multiple times so they learn it. Okay, and then we have to have tools that allow us to have physicians or nurses be able to annotate the data or color it in as you see here. And with that, we can then build a model, and this shows a model here that uses AI to segment the ventricles and these large arteries that come off of the ventricles. So you have the atria and the ventricles and the large arteries. This worked out very well. This is a good example of where we used convolutional neural networks or a deep learning network to try and segment images very quickly and quite accurately, even though there can be quite a bit of variability in how they look, how the study's done, and so forth. So let me jump on to what could go wrong. There's a good example of what went right, but what can go wrong? And in general, I don't love to mention companies' names when we talk about what went wrong, but I'll start out with a very public one, IBM Watson. Everybody knows IBM Watson. They've been in the news and media a lot. But if you look carefully, one of the first commercial things they released, and I don't mean research or advertising, was for oncology, built at Sloan Kettering in New York. They used data in conjunction with the hospital. Obviously, they had to have data contracts, patient privacy, and all the other things. But there's some question about whether they used an adequate variety of data. If you train on one place, it may only work at one place. And they went and distributed that to many other hospitals, including places like MD Anderson, and charged $40 or $50 million for a license. And it didn't work well because they didn't have a variety of data. And since then, companies have learned you need a large variety of data. You need to see all types of patients, all types of treatment. I'll give you a couple other examples here without company names, like lung cancer. If you're going to find lung cancer, you have to label the lung cancer. But when you do automatic labeling, like if you try to use software to help you speed up your labeling, like trying to use software to find stop signs, the software itself can introduce a bias, particularly if you try and use your AI that you're training to actually help with the labeling. That doesn't work, and I've seen that done. Coronary artery plaques. Again, I've seen here where a different problem. Lots of people were imaged. Many of them didn't have disease. Only a few had disease. And only a small number of the ones that had disease had severe disease. And then you try to train your model. The model can't tell what's severe disease. It'd be like, always think of that toddler you're showing images to, of like cats and dogs. If you try to teach them to differentiate between a cat and a dog, and the book has 48 pages of dogs and 2 pages of cats, they're not going to understand it very well. And last thing I want to touch on here is segmentation of vessels. I also seen this mistake where people go, oh, I'm going to build one model to find, let's say, the center lines, the next model to find the walls, and then the next model to do something else. As you cascade down that path, you keep adding up your errors and actually multiplying them, not really adding them. So that can be another problem. So just because you want to do something or you move forwards with an AI model, you may not be doing it in the best possible way. A lot of things can go wrong. So you need a strong tech team. This part, though, is getting much easier as it's automated by various cloud-based systems. This is an idea for disease classification. I just want to give you an idea. There are a lot of cloud-based systems labeled down here that you can use to help you do it. At the same time, it's also got a lot of steps, and it's quite complex. What do I have to do to get cleared for use? I'm moving on to one of the other topics we talked about a little earlier. And the problem here is you can't just build it and then give it to clinicians, physicians to use. It has to get cleared by like the FDA. And to get cleared, you must run a clinical trial. And they're going to look at 2 things, safety and efficacy. That makes sense. Safety means it doesn't harm anyone. And I always hear, well, software can't harm you. Come on, it's just software. Well, let's just take an example. Maybe we build software that looks for when a finger needs to be amputated, cut off. If it tells you that the finger needs to be cut off, but it didn't need to be cut off, that's a false positive, meaning it's giving you a wrong answer, telling you there's disease in the finger, you should chop it off. Well, that's very bad because or let's go with cancers I used in this slide. Let's say it's mammography. It says you have breast cancer. If someone goes and operates on that patient, they don't have breast cancer, that's very bad. Even if they biopsy it, it's bad. So software can cause you to do wrong things. Efficacy means it gives you the right answer. What happens if it misses the breast cancer and says you don't have it and you send the patient home? Well, missed cancer findings can also be bad. So you've got to prove both safety and efficacy. And a lot of people talk about this as being like a sensitivity for the efficacy and then other measures for the safety. The other thing they're going to require is that you have enough patients, meaning that you meet a 95% confidence interval. And oh my God, all these numbers and percents could be confusing. All we're really saying, there's only a 5% chance, there's low variability, meaning your data isn't all over the place, it's all lining up the same. Only a 5% chance that the study said that it works, whatever your software is, when it may not have. So the FDA wants to make sure that the software testing is 95% accurate. Studies, and I want to remind you, these studies seem simple, but they can take up to a year and then cost millions of dollars. A lot of companies spend, listen to this, as much money on their clinical trials and other activities as they did on their tech. Meaning if you raise $10 million, you might spend only $5 million on your tech or less, and more than $5 million on clinical trials and other things required for approval. Proving things are safe is critical in healthcare. Okay? And now you think, I'm finally made it. I can submit it. And now the FDA is going to take somewhere between 3 months and 9 to 12 months to approve it. And I'm not going to go into that whole process. Let's say you get your, what they call clearance. I'm ready to go. Well, that's great. You got 2 more problems. One, you've got to integrate into a healthcare workflow that is highly technical and has a lot of IT challenges. And second, you got to get reimbursed. And I'm not going to spend much time on it right now. We can have questions in a minute, but reimbursement's broken into two categories in the US and many countries: inpatient, and inpatients are reimbursed in the US with a fixed amount of money for a problem. If you come in and say, I've got, trying to think of a good example here, come in and I have, let's say, chest pain and possible heart attack. There is a payment for that, like $30,000. And no matter what treatment or what software they use, it's the same. So if you try to sell someone software, it just costs them money. They don't get any more money. And the only way they can get more money is with a special program called NTAP for new technology that only lasts for 3 years, but it does help you get your product into the market. And you have to apply for it. It takes time. There's only one date. I think it's in May every year. And you have to have some data for that. Outpatients are done differently because, again, it's not one provider. When you go to the hospital does all your care. In an outpatient, you may go see your general practitioner. He may send you to the cardiologist, and he may send you to a radiologist. So everybody gets paid separately. In this case, you would need what's called a CPT code to get paid. Again, a different code. And if your product's used in both cases, you're going to need both of these. And it can take a year or two to get these. So even reimbursement is not easy because it's not paid for by the person. It's paid for by insurance or the government. All right. I just want to give you, actually, I don't even think we need to go through this, the complexity of integrating, but just to integrate into a hospital, you're dealing with the EMR, PACS, speech reporting, scanners and injectors, especially if you're in the radiology space. Then you've got to talk to your cloud, and then you have your AI users. It's not simple. So I think I'm going to kind of leave it there. I don't want to take up any more time. And we'll move on to the discussion with our other experts, if that's okay.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Very insightful, as always, Dr. Agris. And Fiona will share her screen here, and then we will go in order with our Dr. Innovators. Again, the format is 6 minutes for each Dr. Innovator to have an in-depth dialogue with our keynote, Dr. Agris. So let's begin. We have, again, in-depth dialogue. And our 5 Dr. Innovators, our first Dr. Innovator, Fiona, will be Dr. Leonardo Aguiar. I can just briefly introduce each Dr. Innovator. I have put some notes in the chat about what it means to be a certified Dr. Innovator. Dr. Aguiar's distinguished plastic surgeon educated at Catholic University of Pelotas in Brazil. He specialized at the Ivo Pitanguy Institute, who is the famous, father of plastic surgery in Brazil, if not the world. He founded the ACIB Innovation Hub, participated in the Singularity University Future Med program many years ago. He's been doing this a long, long time, developed pioneering digital health products with Empirigus Research, Jovely Natural Health, and Current serves as the chief advisor to TAMP and driving global digital health education and transformation. Please, Dr. Leonardo Aguiar.
Hi, David. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Agris. I would like to first ask you, reflecting on your experience, which strategies or methodologies proved the most effective in fostering collaboration between doctors and tech companies like Google, especially in the creation of software as a medical device or digital therapeutics?
Yeah, that's a great question. Fostering those relationships is not always easy, particularly with such large companies. And sometimes you have to be careful because some of the larger companies are really looking for the data and then they want to develop. And unfortunately, they're missing what the real value of a center like yours is, which is your knowledge about the clinical problem and even how to solve it. So forming some sort of system that lets you impact that development with your knowledge of the patient and the clinical problems and the challenges is really, really important. how to foster that? I think there has to be trust developed on both sides. And if you can work with them to have some sort of collaborative environment, that can be very helpful. But it is hard to break into that. I would say many people, the name recognition of, let's say, Google or now NVIDIA or Apple is huge. I mean, we all know who they are. But you may be better off looking at a smaller company that is a little more nimble and doesn't have the level of, I hate to use the word bureaucracy, but it is bureaucracy in these large companies to make decisions to work with you. So, and sometimes starting with a smaller company establishes yourself as a center of expertise that then may be easier to further work with Google. The other thing I would say is Google and these other companies often have partners. So, you know, Google announced a lot of efforts in the radiology space and 2 partners or 3 partners now. One of them was to help with development with a company, and I'm trying to remember the name of the company, but I will think of it in just a second. And they also announced a collaboration with Bayer Healthcare, depending on how you like to pronounce it, because Bayer has a platform for radiology AI applications, very similar to Microsoft. The difference is Microsoft bought a company called, company names here. I'm going to leave that out for now. But they spent over $13 billion to buy a company, a platform, rather than just working with the company as Bayer and Google had done. So if you can work out with Bayer, then you may also work out with Google. So I think some of those secondary relationships can be very, very, very helpful in this environment.
Oh, thank you so much, Dr. Agris. Just another quick question. And what advice would you offer to us, fellow doctors, innovators, that are aspiring to engage with similar projects like yours and like the ones you shared, and co-create some new technologies? And I think the future is digital therapeutics, how we can connect these both roles.
Yeah, lots of great questions. I mean, I think the people part, as you mentioned, in the relationships is one of those challenges to achieve. And I think your center, where you try to establish a center of excellence and multiple projects and reputation, goes a very long way. At the same time, I think some of the societies are trying to help foster AI in the healthcare arena. So that's another way that you can work that way. And sometimes you just want to be part of the bigger ecosystem, providing data and a little bit of input. And in that way, you may be able to supply data to some of these companies in an ethical way, meaning protecting the patient privacy, depending on the country you're in, different rules apply. And that's another way to participate if you don't have a large innovation center like maybe you have. And when you participate that way, one tool that can be quite helpful, NVIDIA has a tool where the data doesn't have to leave your site. They can actually train from multiple sites without taking the data out of your site. And with that kind of tool, it can be quite easy to collaborate.
Thank you so much, Dr. Agris.
Thank you. Wonderful questions, wonderful answers, and discussion. I have added some additional notes on the Doctor Innovators. We have one that's, we'll say, fast-tracked in his own right. He's a Doctor Innovator. Dr. Harvey Castro is esteemed ER physician with over 20 years experience, recognized as ER Doctor of the Year multiple times by D Magazine, serves as Chief Medical AI Officer at Help AI and CEO of Medical Intelligence Ops, prolific author and speaker in AI and healthcare innovation, holds an MD from the University of Texas Medical Branch, MBA from University of Tennessee, and advises the Singapore Ministry of Health, and dedicated to advancing healthcare with AI and ethical practices. Please, Dr. Castro.
All right, nice to meet you, Doc, and happy to see that you went to Baylor and Rice. I was at both places, so nice to see someone from Texas. My question is pretty simple. As an innovator, and I'm constantly looking at different projects like the FDA, I really have to say I admire your AI background. I can tell right away that the things that you're mentioning, not many people have. And I want to applaud you because not many people have AI, business, and medicine. Those three things, putting them together, and I can see why you're an innovator. And so my question is pretty simple. When you look ahead and you're looking at the FDA and you were doing your algorithm and you obviously came across obstacles, the simple question is, how did you overcome those obstacles? What kind of advice can you give other startup companies? Because I know I see so many people out there wanting to go to the FDA or just start up their startup. So how did you overcome many obstacles?
Yeah, that's a great question. And nice to see we have similar roots. You know, unfortunately, we all learn by mistakes. And I have to say, earlier in my career, having been in this for nearly 2 decades, I would say, I have to be honest, I made some of those mistakes, and you learn from mistakes. Trying to help others now not make those mistakes, you know, by both some of attend these types of innovation forums where they can kind of hear about some of the things they need to think about helps. But I think it's important to surround yourself with people that have some expertise in some of those key areas that I mentioned, or work with an innovation center, hospital, university that has abilities to kind of coach you or provide some of those services. It is not easy to develop in the healthcare AI space. I've seen companies with amazing ideas really struggle to get through the regulatory side. And I've seen others that may have very strong areas in clinical and regulatory struggle with some of the things we talked about on the technical side. So it requires, you know, as they say, to raise a child takes a village. I think it takes a small village to develop healthcare AI products. And that's part of what, you know, not pitching here for anyone, but part of what I and Icenture try to do is we do partner with companies to try to fill some of those holes or coach or help them get through it. And that's also where other kind of innovation hubs that you can join can help, like Y Combinator and others, but they're hard to get into.
Yeah. And then my quick follow-up question, I know you were implying federated learning on with the last question, and that is such a huge way of doing things. What advice do you give other people in general how to keep up with AI in healthcare? Obviously, there's people like you and I that they can follow, but what else do you recommend?
It can be a daunting challenge. You know, the internet's made it a lot easier. If you want to follow regulated healthcare AI, the FDA website lists a lot of what's approved, and you can do some reading. There are also AI that's not approved, we call wellness devices. And wellness devices can't contribute to actual healthcare. There are things like exercise and this and that, and those are not regulated. That's a slightly different area. But the regulated area, which is really what will have the largest impact, in my opinion, on healthcare, I agree with you, it's hard to keep up. But, you know, scanning through what's been approved and how they did it, because there are public records that the FDA shows you, can be quite helpful. And then finding others developing in the area like yourself, where you can just chat and get to create a community is really important. That's back to like raising a child. Raising a healthcare startup is a bit like raising a child.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, I appreciate it, and I look forward to working with you, and I'll let the next speaker go. Nice meeting you.
Nice meeting you too.
Wonderful, wonderful. Love that. Takes a village, takes a tech village, takes a virtual village of some kind. Thank you. Let's move on to Dr. Mili Sinha in India. Over 11 years as an aesthetic consultant specializing in skincare, hair care, and body shaping, innovating, founded Skin Stop during the pandemic, an e-commerce platform offering products and virtual consultations focused on mental health in dermatology, leading in digital health by enhancing telemedicine with video conferencing and AI, committed to actively engaging in continuous education, participating in seminars, and utilizing the latest technologies through TAMP, and the DIUP, which is Digital Innovation Upskilling Program. Please, Dr. Mili Sinha.
Yeah, hello everybody. And hello, Dr. Agris. It has been a wonderful presentation and very enlightening. So I have two questions for you specifically. Since I'm practicing as an aesthetic physician, I want you to help me understand that, when we are trying to establish a telehealth platform for skin care consultations, then what are the best practices that you would recommend for maintaining data protection? Because, skin care consultations can be a little sensitive in their nature. That's one. And my second question is, I have been using a couple of applications and softwares which do give us insight into clinical diagnosis in skincare diseases, but a lot of them don't all the time give a very accurate diagnosis, and sometimes they may fail to, give us the right path. So do you know, or are you aware of any such softwares which are more appropriate? And if not, then how do you think we can, gather enough data and make applications that are more friendly towards helping diagnosing a skin condition?
Yeah, thanks, Dr. Sinha. I think that's a really great question. Touching on telehealth, I think, is a good area. Telehealth doesn't necessarily have to be AI enabled. I heard from your question, about AI to help in analyzing the images and diagnosis. But starting out with telehealth, telehealth is just in the US HIPAA or GDRP compliant in the EU systems and different in other countries to allow physicians or healthcare providers to talk with the patient. And it is critical that privacy is maintained. I think you're best off licensing, if you're going to use it clinically, license a developed program that is compliant and meets the regulations in your country. Just because it's acceptable in the US or acceptable in Europe doesn't mean it will meet the requirements in vice versa or a different country. So just make sure that they are meeting requirements, and usually they have to be approved as at least a class 1 device in some countries, meaning that they have to have all those things I talked about, but they don't need the FDA to actually test it. They just have to maintain data to show that they did the testing. That's the difference in a class 1 and all the things I talked about that are class 2. AI is all class 2. If you're going to develop your own platform, and I don't want to spend a lot of time because I don't think many people are going to do that, I want to mention two things. If it's just you want to layer AI on top of telehealth, or you want to modify a telehealth platform, you're best off licensing a HIPAA compliant or privacy compliant platform and making changes rather than starting from scratch. Second, there are tools, if you do want to do a lot more development in the cloud providers to develop such a platform. And there's 3 key, and I'm sure others will add 4 or 5, but there's at least 3 key cloud providers that everybody knows. There's Google, there's Microsoft, and Amazon, obviously. Now, IBM does have a cloud. It's not as large as the other 3, but that's another possibility that you could look at. I think working out of the cloud is probably much safer and better for you than trying to do something, quote, in-house or on-prem, meaning software and or computer on-prem, because then you're responsible for cybersecurity and all the other things. A lot of that's taken care of for you in the cloud, and most of the telehealth is cloud-based. Coming back to your second question, which was about kind of the inaccuracy of AI, I think that touches nicely on some of the things I tried to speak about in the short introduction. But AI used in healthcare should be approved. If you're using it in your practice, it should be approved. If it's not accurate, I tend to doubt that it's approved. But if it is approved, you're actually supposed to report back any of those failures to the company and to the FDA. The FDA has an 800 number, and in Europe, they have a similar system, so that the company and the FDA has clear feedback, and they will stop allowing it to be used or ask for a letter to the doctor, other things if enough people say there's a problem. I know for skin lesions, though, in the US, I don't think there is a approved application. There are several companies that tried to provide applications that a patient could use to take a picture of a skin lesion and determine if it was malignant or not malignant, something called like melanoma or basal cell carcinoma. The FDA did not approve those. I know they did get approval in the EU. Some of them made them widely available on the internet, and the FDA did issue a public warning to these companies. So I don't believe any of them are approved in the US. So take that, you know, as a direction on why they may not be accurate. And some of the problems the FDA pointed out, and they got input from both the Dermatology Society and from the it's called the IEEE, the Institute of Electrical and Electronic Engineers, which would be more about the AI technology. And both raised concerns, particularly the IEEE, about lighting, magnification, angulation. All of those things are a problem. Now, if you're working with, you know, as I've worked with companies, and there are others out there developing in this area, and there's some in the wound care area, if you put a patch that is of a certain size, certain color, and so forth on the patient, when you take the picture, it allows you to standardize sizing, angulation, color, and so forth. And those types of things are much more likely to get to the FDA, and the results are much more accurate. So that was not done. It's obviously a hindrance. We talk about workflow. I talked a little bit about workflow. You know, how do you get that patch to the patient? They can't just really print it out on their printer at home, because some don't have printers, and those that do, it may not print the same on every printer. So that gets very difficult. And then you have to get creative. Do you partner with a wound company and just have that little circular patch or whatever you're going to use in your picture inserted into the dressing, and then it's sterile, so it won't even bring any bacteria, germs into the wound? But how do you distribute it? And these are all the problems that can come up with AI. But images to diagnose with a smartphone or something, there really are very few approved things in the US, and many other countries are limited for all the reasons I told you. And they also don't love approving consumer devices. Your smartphone's a consumer device, meaning it's not approved for healthcare, and then running healthcare approved AI on it. But those are some of the challenges.
Thank you, Dr. Agris. Apologize, in the interest of time, we do have to move on. Thank you very much. That was a wonderful dialogue. I'd like to move on to Dr. Funmilola Wuraola in Nigeria, consultant general surgeon, lecturer at Obafemi University, and breast surgical oncology fellow at University Health Network, Toronto, Canada. Holds a degree from the University of Leuven and University of Edinburgh, trained in clinical research and Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, which is a couple blocks away from me. Specializes in breast cancer biology and genetics, leading international research on cancer disparities and serving as a principal investigator. Please, Dr. Wuraola.
Hi, everyone. Thank you, David, and well done, Dr. Agris. It's been a pleasure to be here, and because I do so much of advocacy for education and all that, I think I'll start my question from there. So, to Jacob, how did you navigate being a medical doctor and eventually being an AI healthcare professional? What are the practical steps for students, for residents that are interested in going to this pathway? Especially for those of us that are in low middle income country, it's quite important for you to have an idea of how this pathway works from the beginning. So I would like you to share some insights so that people that are still residents that are on this call and people like us that are lecturers will be able to give feedback to our students on how to help them better.
Yeah, that's a really terrific question on education. And I know many societies in many countries are trying to address it in the medical area. I'd kind of divide it in two parts, and maybe I can ask you which one you're interested in or both. One is the user. So as more and more AI starts getting adopted into healthcare, and I mean on the delivery side, because AI can help with what we call workflow orchestration, meaning how to get the patient to the right doctor, the right test, or the right whatever, which is not regulated, but more improving workflow? Or is it actually in the clinical care spectrum? And in that case, that's the regulated software we talked about. But are you the user, meaning are you using software to help find skin lesions like we just heard about? Or are you trying to develop the software? And those are two different kind of educational pathways. Do you want me to comment on both, or is one of particular interest?
I like it's coming on both.
Okay. So I think that I'm slowly seeing societies incorporate, and what I mean by that is every medical specialty has a society. So if you're a cardiologist, there's a society of cardiologists, but each of them determines educational requirements and other things for you to graduate, and you have to take boards or a test at the end. So a lot of them are very carefully looking at what is required in education in this era for clinicians. And what they're worried about is exactly what we heard about skin lesions is, hey, should I use this software, not use it? Is it accurate enough? Is it not accurate enough? How do I read the labeling from the whoever made the software about how accurate it is? Or do I know enough to say they didn't test it well enough? So we're trying, and when I say we, I'm watching a lot of societies gain knowledge, talk to experts, and start incorporating things into their curriculums on what software is available, when AI is available, and how do you really determine whether it's accurate, how you should use it, how much to believe it or count on its results. And I think that's really important. And going through the societies is good. And some of that's advancing very quickly in the areas it's impacted most. So for example, in the US, there's probably a little over 600 applications that have gone through the FDA. But the majority, by majority, I mean like probably 70, 80% are all in radiology. And then the next largest area is imaging and cardiology. So imaging is the biggest area. That said, the Radiology Society and now the Cardiology Society are taking it very, very seriously because they see it having big impact on accuracy and efficiency. So they're incorporating it into their curriculums. The second part of the question is, how do you teach people how to develop these things? Some of the societies are starting to incorporate additional optional training that students can do. And sometimes they take an additional year, which is a lot of time, I admit, but it can take that long to get involved in either a project or with the society on how to develop AI. And the American College of Cardiology has not only programs, but data and other things in that area. And other societies are slower to adopt because it has less impact on their clinicians. But I would say, additional time in the area can help. There are short courses. Some of the societies have online or short courses. Some of them have them even at their annual meetings. Those are all different ways people can get educated. I still worry, though, that a lot of what these societies teach is the mechanics, like what bolts and nuts to turn to build or do AI. And it's gotten easier because of the tools in the cloud from Google and Microsoft and Amazon. That said, they're not telling you, though, how do I get regulated? What is a quality system? What do I have to document? How do I apply to a regulatory body? And some of them are covering it and some are not, but it's tough. And that gets more complicated. And part of my story of how I got in the industry is I was an academic physician. And I was first at Johns Hopkins, and then the chief at MCV. And I had no idea what I was doing, to be blunt, on this commercialization side. And I spent some time when I was asked to come over to Bayer Healthcare to head up medical in their radiology group and I quickly was understanding and learning all these other aspects. So it's not easy. And again, I think incubator kind of programs and things like that all can be helpful if you want to start a company to actually do this.
Thank you. My follow-up question.
Yeah, go ahead.
I think we're right at time. So sorry. If you
Okay.
could put your
Okay, no
question,
problem.
we can continue in our chat group. If you'd like to, Dr. Wuraola, please type your question in the chat. Thank you. Wonderful dialogue. Wonderful dialogue. We're going to move on to Dr. Mohammed Ayaz. Dr. Ayaz is an expert in plastic and reconstructive surgery, reconstructive burns and hand surgery at Teaching Hospital in Pakistan, serving over 5 million people. Innovation and advocacy, focusing on restoring form and function in resource-limited areas, and advocates for digital health literacy. Certified Doctor Innovator at TAMP, developing platforms to support healthcare innovators. Committed to fostering collaborative community that leverages digital health technology to advance medicine and improve patient care. Please, Dr. Ayaz.
So thank you, Professor David, and thank you, Dr. Agris, for a relatively complex but insightful presentation. My question is based on the use of digital health technology in improving care in diabetic population. As diabetes is prevalent in Pakistan, and it is one of the leading cause of morbidity and mortality. Most of these patients develop diabetic foot ulcer at some point, and as a reconstructive surgeon, we are tasked with management of these wounds. So my question is how digital health technologies and AI can be leveraged to prevent the formation of diabetic foot ulcers, particularly in a high-risk population in the first place, and how these technologies can be utilized for the early detection to prompt treatment.
Fantastic questions. In every country, there are a lot of patients with diabetic foot ulcers, and they're a little bit of a forgotten group, particularly in highly developed countries, because it's usually an older group and it's not a well-reimbursed area. And it's even more important in developing countries because there's more need to walk and other things these patients can't. This is a critical area, and it's been hard to make progress here. But I think there are a number of areas where I've seen real progress, and combinations of device and AI software to analyze the data. Something we called, and I should have mentioned this. So in healthcare AI, if you develop software, it's called SAMD, software as a medical device. If you develop software that's embedded on the device, like on a wearable or something, we call it SIMD, software embedded in a medical device. And both of those are regulated areas. But prevention is huge, and I believe very strongly in it, and looking for biomarkers that can be detected using AI. There are several technologies that are out there. A couple of them I love. One of them is almost a scale-based system. You can just have it in your home. You step on it. It is a medical device. It does basically thermal imaging of the soles of your feet when you're stepping on it. And it tells you, because of the thermal imaging, if you're at risk of developing a diabetic foot ulcer. So here we're detecting it at home without having to go to the hospital or the doctor before it occurs. It probably is an early stage, like a grade 1, early grade 1, where you don't see any open sore yet. And from that, you then can do what's called offloading. And so, the rest of our listeners know we have them wear orthotics or special shoes where that area that may be developing a wound or a hole doesn't have pressure on it, because the pressure is often the precipitating factor for some of these, because it pushes on the blood vessels and therefore collapses them, and they don't have good blood flow in the area and develop a hole or a wound because the tissue does. That said, if you can predict early enough and then get them into an orthotic, a shoe that can prevent for a long period of time, probably eventually they'll get a diabetic foot ulcer as they age, but at least for years, prevent. And I think that's super helpful. I mean, patients that could move from age 60 to age 70, big difference in their life of 10 years without a diabetic foot ulcer. There are orthotics that have pressure sensors and other things in them, boots and so forth, that try to give you an idea and they use it. And again, I'm not talking about the device. The device, look, we've had thermal imaging forever. Taking a thermal imaging camera, though, and using AI to interpret that signal and predict if you're going to have a diabetic foot ulcer is where the magic occurs. And let me also touch on the clinical trials here. Why does this take like 5 years to get to market or longer? Well, to prove this, you have to run a study where you have a bunch of patients that may or may not be developing foot ulcers. You need positives and negatives, as I said, some that have them and don't. Go use the scale, step on, or not a scale, but scale-like device that measures the thermal signal, use your AI to interpret it, and then see if they develop a diabetic foot ulcer maybe within the next 6 months. So it's not a very easy trial. You may even have to wait a year to see if they develop it. So you're looking at a year or two long trials. You have to have a bunch of patients. They've got to use the scale. Some have to develop foot ulcers, some have to not, and then see what the predictive value of your AI is. To make it even more complicated, if you think that they may be developing a diabetic foot ulcer, is it even ethical to just see if they develop it, or do you have to suggest they get an orthotic? And if you do that, it's even harder to run your trial, because then the patient no longer develops the diabetic foot ulcer. So all these things come into play in developing a medical device. But I love the technology and the idea of using AI to analyze a very basic thermal signal. There are two companies in the area. One's already FDA approved. The other one's close to it. They're in their clinical trial called Blue Drop. I think Blue Drop is worth taking a look at. So that's definitely one area. The next thing that happens is you have the patient that already has the diabetic foot ulcer. What do you do then? And a lot of them are hard to heal wounds. And I like, and usually for two reasons. Either they have infection and it's overt, not just colonized, or they have poor blood supply or other reasons that the wound's not healing. And sometimes those are very hard to determine, especially if you're not an expert. And even experts have a hard time with overt infection sometimes. So there are technologies. There's fluorescent imaging, again, been around forever, fluorescent camera, but it's the AI that interprets the signal that's so critical. So one company in this area, and there aren't many, out of Canada is Moleculite. Moleculite has a thermal camera, has a fluorescent camera, and then interprets the signal to see if there's a high enough number of bacteria that it's likely infected, so you know to treat it. And then you can treat it with, there are dressings that have silver or other things in them to prevent infection, or if it's really severe, you can try oral or IV antibiotics. But this helps to get that under control. Another good use of AI combined with a device. The other simple thing is just take a picture with a smartphone or smart tablet and analyze it. And there's companies out there doing that as well. In that, they have to be very careful because some of those approvals will let them sort of measure things in the wound, but not diagnose and not detect disease. So they can only say, I see these parameters, and then the physician has to interpret it. To get beyond that, it may be difficult with those types of devices with the FDA. But as I mentioned, big step forward came when we used a standardized like paper standardization spot we could stick on the wound. So that helps to determine if the wound is stalled in healing or hard to heal, and potentially what the causes are. And from there, you can standardize the care. And I'll mention, because we talked about virtual visits and having telehealth, but another thing that's really, really important, you think, how could this be important? And that's the electronic medical record. There's some of those that are now specialized for wound care. So how does that help me and my patient? That helps you because through that, it may capture those images, and you can set up, or it may already have some standard pathways set up about workflow orchestration. And workflow orchestration allows you to follow very fixed pathways like checklists, so that people like nurses or whatever can provide standardized high level of care and have much better outcomes. So Convatec, and I was the chief medical officer there several years back, has clinics in 10, 11, 12 countries outside of the US, places like Mexico and Brazil and so forth. And by using that type of system, they have decreased the time to heal, decreased the cost, and gotten the patient up and out again. So all those things can have impacts. And you may have other ideas. I mean, please feel free to suggest to me any things you've come across that may be helpful.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Dr. Agris. Let's move to our interactive Q&A session. If you have not already, I put a note in the chat. If you would like to raise your hand, like you can see mine here, just go down to React. There's a little button at the bottom, and you can raise and lower your hand or just unmute and say something, ask your question, or type it in the chat, however you prefer. Okay,
While we're
right.
waiting for,
Yes,
yeah, I'll take
please.
1 second to make a quick update here.
Yes.
I didn't use a lot of names, but I'm hearing that maybe people wanted to kind of get a little more ideas. So I mentioned Google has partners that they've announced. So one of their partners, Quantify, is an onshore offshore company in many countries that helps them develop some of their AI from data. They also partnered with the largest hospital system in the US, HCA, to get data. So if you can enter into this through HCA or through Quantify, that may be another way to work with some of these large companies. And it didn't come to my mind as we were talking, but Microsoft bought Nuance, which has a number of products like PowerScribe for dictation, but it also has a platform for AI. So what they're trying to develop at Bayer and at Microsoft Nuance is almost like an app store, but an app store with just approved healthcare AI applications that doctors could use. So they want to put their platform into your practice or hospital, and then you can choose applications on there that use AI to interpret different things.
Okay.
But again, they have
Thank
to
you.
be approved.
Wonderful. Wonderful. We do have a question that came in from Dinesh Verma. Is there a regulatory framework in India for SIMD that you are aware of?
Yes. India definitely has a regulatory framework. I'm moderately familiar, so I don't want to give too many specifics. And when you say SIMD, you're meaning embedded in a device, not as standalone software. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Yes, so if it's embedded in the device, it's going to work its way through with the device. So typically, either as an add-on or as part of that application. And that's reviewed similar to the way it would be in Europe or the US and India. The standalone software is a little different process, but the embedded software works through a similar process. You're going to have design controls, a quality system. You're going to have testing, like clinical type testing or trials. The only time you don't need testing is if you're just measuring something or saving data. So a electronic medical record doesn't require anything but bench testing, meaning just to prove that you stored the right number in the right place as the right patient. But if you want to do anything of detecting disease, diagnosing disease, or the third category we talk about is triage, saying, look at this patient because they may have something severe like a stroke. All of that's going to require that clinical testing.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And now we're
Yeah.
wanted to move to the African continent. Do you have experience working with medical AIs on the African in the African continent?
I have limited experience here. We've had a project with South Africa, and in the Middle East, we've had projects with Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia has been very proactive, as well as some of the other Middle Eastern countries, to bring in digital and AI solutions, because it aids their physicians in taking more generalists and making them at the level of more specialists. Plus, it increases efficiency if you have fewer physicians. And let me see the question exactly. Yes, and coming back to South Africa, some of the regulations there for software alone are not as stringent as has been developed in some of the other countries, and some of them don't require clinical testing and just bench type testing, but you still have to make a submission. I don't know all the countries, obviously, but at least South Africa, they're still gonna require that pretty standard regulatory methods. My 2 cents, and I don't want to take much time on this for regulation, is no country wants to have less regulation than any other country. So they may not have the resources. They may say, first get approved by the FDA or the EU or Australia or China or South Korea or Japan, which are the big ones, and then we'll review it. There are a few, though, that are a little behind on SAMD, software as a medical device, no hardware, and don't regulate it very stringently. But it will occur. They just are slower to get to the same level of regulation.
Fabulous discussion. Thank you very much. I think we're about at time. We'll see you next Saturday, same time. If you have questions, please add them here or in our chat group. And our Doctor Innovators, our keynotes, and digital influencers will do their best to answer those. We'll have an insightful dialogue next week, so look for that on our LinkedIn event page. So we'd like to get a group photo, and then we're going to leave here. If you could please, if you're somewhere that you can turn on your camera, and we will do a screenshot and share that iPhone coming in. Maybe that's with the Steve group. Jobs returning here to join our call. You can wave, smile, look like you're having fun, like you're happy. All right, welcome everyone. I think we are ready to bigger. It's ready to explode here after all the wonderful discussions.
And listen,
Okay.
if anybody has any questions, my email is in there. Feel free to reach out or anything you'd like to chat about.
Excellent, excellent. We'll provide all of the contact information, email. Thank you very much. And we'll have our chat group, and we'll see you back here next time. So thank you, everyone. Thank you to our keynote. Thank you to all of our Doctor Innovators and participants for making this such a wonderful webinar. Take care. Have a great morning, afternoon, evening. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Thank you from Brazil. Bye-bye from Brazil.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.